Most of y'all know me by name via email and letters. Now you know me by face. I'm Melissa Barnhart. I am the Project Administration and Compliance Manager with Hamel. I've been here 20 years in various roles. Lately I've been shadowing Deanne, learning more the in and outs of the DC compliance requirements. Although today we're diving into the first source agreement, we really want to focus on communication and what can or could happen when you aren't facing the requirements, when you don't meet them, what we can do with DOES to get through that, and what some of the ramifications may be if we don't. So one of the most important things is, if you know you're not going to be able to make the requirements, to jump on communication early and fast with Hamel and DOES and work through everything. We do have a sign-in sheet, so please pass that around. There's waters to the left back here. Our restrooms are in the main building just across the parking lot. And for anyone that didn't print out a packet, do we need packets?
All right, thank you, Melissa. My name is Deanne Rodula. I've been with Hamel for 10 years now. And I have two people from our compliance department that I do want to also introduce, because you may see their names, you may get emails from them periodically, you may have gotten them already, but at the back, if you'll stand up, please, I have Laura Coulter with the long hair, and Casey Mills next to her. And these are two members of our compliance department. We have two others, Karina and Deborah Wilder and Karina Coulter, and they were both at the last session, so they aren't here. Come on in. There's a place right up here for you. That takes us all back, doesn't it? So anyway, as Melissa said, we're going to go through basically concentrating on the first source agreement that requires the number of percentage hours worked. The old first source agreement that we're all used to is 51% new hires. But then now they've added this other part. The 51% of new hires requirement is still in effect for projects that receive less than $5 million from the DC government. We have just one project right now here at Hamel that falls under the 51% category. So if your company is on Bread for the City, that's the one that you're under. So 51% of all new hires must be DC residents, and you need to hire through DOES. That's why this agreement is called a first source agreement. They're your first source for hiring. Yes?
You said it's 51% for a project that receives, what was the funding?
Less than $5 million in DC government assistance for the project. So if the project receives $5 million or more, you're going to fall in the percentage hours worked requirements. And that is that 20% of all journey workers' hours on the project for your company, 20% must be performed by DC residents. That's for journey workers. 51% of all skilled laborer hours must be performed by DC residents. 60% of all apprentice hours need to be performed by DC residents. And 70% of all common laborer hours must be done by DC residents. So there are 4 categories, and with a different percentage point assigned to them. Still, you have to hire through DOES if you need to hire workers. But clearly, no matter which of the two laws you're falling under, DOES, the Department of Employment Services, wants DC residents to be employed. That is the goal. DC residents need to be employed, yes.
Sorry, I don't mean to ask.
That's okay.
My understanding was on the 51%, if you're hiring specifically just for that project, the employee's only going to work on that project and nowhere else, they have to be a DC resident. But if you're hiring an employee for your company and they may be working, let's just use Bread for the City. They may be working out there, but they're also working on multiple other projects at the same time, then you don't have to actually, it doesn't have to be a DC resident employee that you're hiring. Is that correct?
If you're working on Bread for the City, and we talked about this in the last session, and Omar Chambers from DOES was here in the last session. So something similar came up to this scenario. So we're only talking about the 51% new hire rule here. We're not talking about the percentage of hours worked. Each project kind of stands alone. So if you have multiple projects that have 51% new hire requirements, if you hire someone during the time that you're on these projects, and maybe you're on, I'm picturing that you're on the projects concurrently, the first project that that person reports to work on his very first day of work, that's the project that can claim that person as a new hire. If that person then gets transferred to another project, even if he only worked on that project for a day, he's now a job transfer. And you would be reporting this in the FORS system, online, monthly. Because the 51% new hire projects have monthly reporting requirements in the FORS system. So whatever project that a new hire reports to first, that's the only project that they can be reported as a new hire. Now, the question kind of arose the last time, well, what happens if I hire a guy and I think I'm going to need him on such and such a date, but the project is delayed, and now I've hired him, and I've got no place to put him because I can't put him on this job for another 2 weeks, whatever it is. So even though you hired him for the one project, wherever he goes first on the first day of employment is where he's a new hire at. And every project stands alone. Now, I will cover one more point in the 51% hire area because a question came up before. What if you hire office people during the time you're on this project? Well, you know the office people do not show up on your certified payroll, and they aren't the ones getting reported on the job in your FORS system. So how do you report that to DOES? And you're going to have to email the DOES monitoring person. That person is identified on your cover letter that you get back from your first source agreement when it's fully signed. So I would be in touch with that DOES person. And if at any time you don't know who that is, please feel free to call us or email us here at Hamel. If you don't know which compliance person is handling a job, you can send an email to compliance@hamelbuilders.com and you'll get all of us. So whoever's in charge of that job will answer your question. Okay? Yep.
So, I'm not sure if I didn't get the answer I was
Okay.
looking for. So if I do hire somebody during the period of time, I'll use Bread for the City, because that's really what we're here for today, so it's relevant. If I hire somebody and they're not being hired specifically for working on the Bread for the City job, but I've hired a field staff member, they don't have to be a DC resident, or they do have to be a DC resident?
51% of all new hires for that project during the time you're on that project, 51% of all new hires must be DC residents.
But as long as he reports to a different job on his first day of work, he's not considered a new hire. If he goes to Bread for the City on his second day of work, he's now not a new hire anymore.
That's right. And when Mr. Chambers was here the last time, he said, yes, you're right.
Okay.
But that's a way of deceiving the system. And therefore, if they realized what was going on, it would not be a good thing.
Right, okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
So when you get your contract, you're going to get an affirmative action packet, and it's going to have a first source agreement in it. You are responsible to fill out this first source if your contract is $300,000 or more. If your contract is $250,000 or something, I would still pay very close attention to this document. And I'm glad you're here today, because change orders could bring your contract value over $300,000. At which time, we're going to ask you for a first source agreement, and you're going to be responsible to fulfill this. Now, I will tell you that if you only have a couple weeks or maybe even just a month left on your contract, we're all going to go to DOES and we're going to say, hey, they just got this change order and they can't possibly fulfill these hours worked requirements. What can we do here? So I don't want you to worry about that. They're going to be understanding about that. You just got the change order, and it's, you've gone through all this work thinking that you didn't have a first source agreement, and at the very last minute something comes through and puts you over the $300,000. Don't worry about it. We're going to work together to get it all taken care of. Because, as Tom said, Hamel has now realized that we need to do more here. So we are going to be working with you as a team. We're going to be working together. We're going to be working to figure out the way that every single subcontractor can meet the requirements of this agreement, even the percentage hours worked. We're going to do it together, because we're going to understand what the law is, we're going to make a plan to meet the law, and we're going to work the plan, and we're all going to do it together. Okay? Yes, Tim?
I have a question. Do we have some sort of mechanism in place, it's like a warning, when we go over that $300,000 threshold, that someone in compliance?
The compliance team keeps track of that, yes.
I'm right there, right for the city. My contract was $268, and I got about $330,000 in change. So it's when I hit $300,000, now we start tracking first source at that point, or does it backtrack to the beginning of when I started?
Now, with Bread for the City, you're on the 51% new hire ruling. So I think it would start immediately upon when you had to do your first source agreement. And from that point on, any new hires that you had would, 51% of them would need to be DC residents.
Does that backtrack to the start of the job, or is it at the time I signed that change order and I'm now over my limit?
I don't think it's going to backtrack to the time when you first started the job. DOES may ask you questions about it, so be prepared to answer that. Be prepared to give them the evidence that your change order that took you over $300,000 was dated such and such a date, and from that date on, maybe you didn't even have any hires. So 51% of 0 is 0, and you're in compliance.
Thank you.
Okay? Yes, Maria?
As you know, we have a hard time finding skilled labor that would meet those requirements because of the industry that we're in and the liability associated with it. And, I mean, we have trying to get DC, and we do have certain individuals that fit that criteria, but we don't have enough that would meet all the criteria for the over 5 million. So then my question is, if there is a contract that I'm looking at, and I'm looking at part 2 of over 5 million, because of the industry that I'm in, do I walk away from that because I can't meet that criteria, or do I try to meet that criteria and show proof of such?
I don't want you to walk away from it. Her question is if she knows she can't meet the requirements because she knows the limitations of the types of employees. It's very hard to find the employees that are skilled enough and capable enough to do the work that she needs them to do. So she doesn't have DC workers. Should she just not try to get any contracts that are over $300,000 in the district? And I'm going to say no, don't walk away from these contracts. But we will get into that, in the remedy for that, in a few minutes. Okay? Stick with me.
I'm with you.
All right, so you have a contract, it's over $300,000, you have to fill out this document. We're talking about the percentage of hours worked requirements on this now. Although, this is the same document that you would fill out if it was a 51% job. Okay? This part is the same document. So you're going to get this from us, and the top section, except for the total contract amount, is going to be filled in for you. In the total contract amount, I would like you to put your contract amount with Hamel. I know it's not the total contract amount for the job of everything on the project, but this is the only place we have to put your contract amount on this first page of the document. And I think it's important that your contract amount be here. So that's why I'm saying put your contract amount there. The next section is going to be filled in for you also, because it talks about how the government has assisted the project. You guys wouldn't know that, and I only know it to fill out Hamel's form based on the form that the owner had to fill out. So that's where it all comes from. It starts with the owner. But there is one part in here that Hamel checks off. Hamel is going to check off the box that says per each subcontractor. The general contractor will meet the hiring or hours worked percentages requirements for each subcontractor. We have tried to work it the other way. We tried once to work it for the entire project, thinking, okay, maybe some subs can fill in where other subs can't meet the requirements. But it didn't work out very well. It seemed like just everybody was falling short. And so rather than do that, we decided that every subcontractor should just be responsible for their own stuff. That being said, I still want to assure you that Hamel is going to work with you to make sure that you are meeting the requirements. Okay? So we're not in this just completely separate. We're in it together. We're going to help you, even when it looks dim. We can all do this. The project name and address and the project start and end date will be filled in for you, but you will have to fill in the employer's start date and the employer end date. Then you will have to fill in your employer information. Just below that, they're asking if you are a CBE, Certified Business Enterprise, certified by DSLBD in the district, they want your certification number there. If you're not certified, then just ignore the question. The next question has to do with the DC Apprenticeship Council. They want to know your registration number with the DC Apprenticeship Council. That's because DOES also monitors the DC Apprenticeship Program. And by DC law, you are required to have a DC Council approved apprenticeship program if you do $500,000 or more of business in DC per year. Not just on one contract. You could have 3 $200,000 contracts and you're over 500,000. So that's the law. Then the question of are you a subcontractor should be marked yes when you get this form. And the name of the prime contractor should be on the form. That might be Hamel Builders, Inc., it might be Hamel Commercial, or it might be Hamel Builders of Washington. We have 3 different business names that we do business as a general contractor. If this form is not filled out for you, these things that I've mentioned on the form that should be filled out for you, then please contact the person that sent this form to you and ask them about that. Hey, my form didn't have any information on it. I think I need some more information, because do not sign a form that you don't have all the information on. Okay? Yes, Tim?
Sorry. So in estimating, we are sending this form out with all of our projects now. We've actually gone back to 2 jobs that are very close to closing and turning over to production, Randall Hill and Providence Place. Projects moving forward that are going out for pricing, we're sending this blank form out to all the subcontractors. It will be blank, or should it not be blank?
I thought you were just sending out the employment plan.
We're sending out the employment plan,
Okay.
but I guess we're not sending out this. Should this accompany the employment plan?
For the estimating purposes, we may not have this all the information.
That's kind of where I was getting to.
So we can't really fill it out for the estimating time. But when you get it after you've been awarded the contract.
Okay.
Because for estimating, you're not going to sign the first source agreement.
Right.
It's not going into DOES. You don't have a contract yet. But this was a suggestion that came to us from DOES, was to have our subcontractors fill in the employment plan when they turn in their proposals. This makes sure that you understand what you're responsible for that project.
Subs are gonna wanna know mostly, and I don't wanna speak for all the subs in here, but they're gonna wanna know, is the project receiving $5 million or more funding? That's gonna be a question. If you don't know that answer, if it's not present in our bid solicitation, please send that to us as an RFI in Building Connected, and we will try to find out. We will not always know. Most of the time, the default answer is gonna be yes, the project's getting more than $5 million funding. I think it's gonna be rare to see one, even a project that may not have an aggregate construction cost of $5 million, the price of the owner buying that building may be part of the $5 million ask from the district. So please, if you're unclear, ask us in estimating that key question right there.
For anybody that isn't aware, this is Tim Bowes, who heads up Hamel's Estimating and other things, business development.
If anybody has any questions, you actually have pretty much.
A lot of estimators are here.
Team here.
Yeah, we have Dan Beagle, Chris Stewart, Jeff Warner, David Wall, and did I miss anybody in estimating? So we have quite a few estimators here at this session. And they are here to help you too. Everybody in Hamel is here to help you all. So we're not in this on our own.
Thanks.
So the two boxes at the bottom of page 1 are very important because the box that is checked is indicating which set of requirements you're doing for this project. So if less than $5 million has been received for the project, the first box should be checked. If more than $5 million has been received for the project, in DC government assistance this is, then the bottom box will be checked. You'll be able to know that if you go back up to the section to be completed by the beneficiary only, the total government assisted funded amount should be in there. If that amount is over $5 million, the second box should be checked. If it's under $5 million, the first box should be checked. Okay? So if there is some kind of confusion because of the amount that you see there and the box that is checked, please call Hamel. We're not perfect. We sometimes make mistakes too. But we don't want to send in a first source agreement that is incorrect. So we want to correct it. Okay? Going over to the second page, the very first thing that it says is DOES is the first source for recruitment, referral, and placement of new hires or employees for all jobs created by the government-assisted project or contract. So they're saying the purpose of this agreement right there. They want you to hire through DOES. First source, DOES. And then it says the parties agree to the terms and conditions of the agreement as follows. I bring that up because this tells you this is a contract. This is a contract between you, your company, and DOES. It will be signed by DOES and returned to you. And when you get that back, the cover letter on what's returned to you, the very bottom paragraph will identify the compliance monitoring person at DOES who has been assigned to this job. So you will have a contact person from DOES to talk to about this project as well. Okay? But Hamel's here to help you, and if you ever need to go to DOES to talk to them about things, Hamel will go with you. We're going to go through these definitions, but not all of them. The first one I want to talk about is D, the direct labor costs. The direct labor costs are all costs, including wages and benefits, associated with the hiring and employment of personnel assigned to a process in which payroll expenses are traced to the units of output and are included in the cost of goods sold. This is kind of a complex way of saying the payroll expenses of all the people you have on the work site for the project, including the payroll taxes, any fringe benefits you pay, workers' comp, unemployment taxes, all of that stuff. These are your direct costs. Okay? I want to skip here and go to the next page for a minute. We'll come back to this one. But I also want to go to item K on page 3. That's indirect labor costs. The indirect labor costs are all costs, including wages and benefits, that are part of operating expenses, like overhead, and are associated with the hiring and employment of personnel assigned to tasks other than producing products. So these are not the people that are on site, but maybe you have an HR person who is involved in the hiring of your people on site. So a small portion of that person's wages, benefits, taxes, etc., may come into play here just for the hiring that you're doing for this project. The more hiring you're doing, the more cost you're probably incurring, but this would typically be in your overhead costs, okay? And we'll talk about why we're talking about those definitions later. An employer is any entity awarded a government-assisted project totaling $300,000 or more, including all individual contractor and subcontractor entities at any tier who work on the project. So if you tier out some of your work to other subcontractors working below you, please, you have an obligation to us. If their contracts are over $300,000, they also have to fill out a first source agreement. They also are responsible for certified payroll, just the same as you are. They also would be responsible for any DHCD paperwork that may happen to be on this job. So everything that applies to you applies to them. But they only have to fill this out if they have a contract of $300,000 or more, just like you only have to fill it out if you have a contract of $300,000 or more. So a question we had last time was, well, what if my contract is $400,000 and I sub out $200,000 of that? So I only have $200,000 less. Am I still responsible for this? And the answer is yes. You still have a $400,000 contract, and it's over $300,000. So you are responsible for whatever employees you put on the job. Your tier sub that only has a $200,000 contract, they don't have a first source agreement, so they aren't going to need to meet the percentages unless change orders bring them over $300,000. Yes, Jeff?
What if the employee that you put on the job is just there to manage the subcontractors and actually not doing any work?
If the employee is not doing any work on the project, that employee will not appear on certified payroll. All of these percentage hours worked projects, certified payroll will be done through LCP Tracker, the online certified payroll system. LCP Tracker has reports in it that give the district all the information it needs to know about where your workers are from, how many DC hours you have, how many non-DC hours you have, across the board in all 4 categories. So, I'm sorry, Jeff, I lost your question.
Basically, all I'm saying is, if your
So the
foreman is the only person on that job that's working for your company on site, and they're a foreman, and all they're doing, not picking up a tool, but just managing the subcontractors that you have.
So they are not performing work. This foreman is not performing any work at all, then he does not appear on the certified payroll report.
So supervision is not considered.
The supervision only comes into play on the certified payroll report when the supervisor works 20% or more of the time. So if they are a working supervisor, they must appear on the report. If they are just supervising, they are not on the report. Therefore, if they're not a DC resident, those hours are not included in your LCP tracker reporting, and they won't count against you.
So, just a follow-up, just one, so if I'm a subcontractor and I have a $500,000 contract, and I sub out to 2 different subs to do the work on the site. One's got a $250,000 contract, one's got a $150,000 contract. And the only labor I put on that site is a manager to manage those subcontractors. And the rest of my contract is either materials or overhead. Then basically, by the end of the job, I have no labor hours. I have a $500,000 contract, but I'm not responsible, and I've met the first source requirement.
That is true. And the only caution I'll give is that if you are a CBE company, this doesn't help Hamel very much. Because when you tier sub to non-CBE companies and you're a CBE company, then Hamel does not, or the project, I should say, does not get credit for any of the non-CBE contracted work that's done. So in the case that Jeff just gave, $400,000 was being subbed out to 2 different non-CBE companies out of his $500,000 contract. So now the project only has $100,000 of CBE credit. So I am going to ask you to make sure that estimating knows at the time of your proposal if you are subbing out to tier subs that are not CBEs, because that makes a difference. We have to know about that. If we know about it, we might be able to plan for it, but we can't plan if we don't know. All right? If you're not a CBE company and you happen to do some tier subbing with a CBE company, we can use that information. And if you give us a copy of your contract with your tier sub, who's a CBE, and they would have to fill out a vendor verification form, but we could get credit for CBE on those folks. Okay? Doesn't have anything to do with First Source, but it has to do with our projects in DC.
We need to know that up front too. That would help us up front.
Yes, definitely. Any information like that. The earlier you can communicate anything to Hamel, the better. The earlier you can communicate problems with this agreement to Hamel and DOES, the better. You know, it's all a matter of communication. And we're here to work with you. All right? So, H is a good faith effort. Good faith effort is really important when working with DOES. It's a big item. I do want you to just note here that when they say good faith effort, they mean the employer has exhausted all reasonable means to comply with any affirmative action, hiring, or contractual goals pursuant to the First Source law and this agreement. The word is exhausted. That means you can't just give it a little bit of effort. That means you have to give it an all-out effort. So it does take some work, but we're going to learn the law, we're going to make a plan, and we're going to work the plan. So we're all going to be good. It's all going to be fine. On page 3 at the top, the hard to employ, this is a list of different types of people that you can employ and get extra credit, if you will, for. If you employ a hard to employ person, you actually get double counted. You can double count their hours, up to 15% of the total hours, of your total hours. So there's a special way to indicate that the employee is a hard-to-employ person in the LCP tracker, and if you have questions about that, you can email compliance@hamillbuilders.com, and we will be glad to point out in the LCP tracker system exactly where that is. It's under the Add Edit Employees. Okay? I want to go down to O, only because you guys already know what a journeyman is, but because it's one of the 4 categories that DOES uses in their first source agreements, I want you to understand how broad this category is. The other 3 categories of the 4 are very specific. A common laborer is a very specific type of worker. Even the skilled laborer, there's very few people that you can put on your certified payroll reports as skilled laborers. A lot of times it's not even in the wage decision. Apprentices, those are the people that are in a state-approved apprenticeship program, and that's the only time that you can pay them less money than what's on the wage scale. But all the rest fall into journey workers. So I just want you to know that. All the rest fall into the journey worker category. The revised employment plan we will be going over. This is the document that Tim was talking about that estimating is going to be asking for when you turn in a proposal to us. And I'll go through what's required in this document later. If we turn to page 5 and look at the general terms, this document that I have and that you have right here is a document based on the fact that you're turning this in before you start your work. If you have started your work, there is a second first source agreement, and I think it has a number 2 at the top, very top in the title. But it has a separate paragraph on page 2 of the document that you don't have in front of you that says that the employer began his work before submitting a first source agreement. It basically says that you are responsible for everything in this first source agreement from the date you started the project. So apparently some people were trying to put in that, well, I didn't sign my first source agreement until this date, so I'm not responsible for anything before that date. But you're responsible for the whole project from the time, the first day you went on site. Okay? Part B deals with the tiers, and I think we already talked about that. In C, it specifically says that no work can begin prior to the execution of the agreement. It will be fully effective through the duration, any extension or modifications of the project, and until such time as construction is complete and the certificate of occupancy is issued. So from the time you start work until the project is complete, the agreement is in effect. D says that if the employer began work prior to the execution of the first source employment agreement, the employer shall cease work. Not only do you have to fill out a different form, but you're going to stop your work. They could come in and make you stop your work. And E is DOES will provide recruitment, referral, and placement services to the employer subject to the limitations of this agreement. So you are going to work with DOES to hire. They have some pretty concrete ways that you can do that. One way that's required is to go through dcnetworks.org to hire. I haven't found that that's a great resource, but it is required. So do it and take a screenshot to prove your good faith effort. There is a contact person that works with the Business Services Department at DOES that I can email you after this that will help you one-on-one find someone, okay? I would recommend going through them. So, if you are a union company, this agreement is still in effect. DOES will make every effort to work within the terms of all collective bargaining agreements to which the employer is a party. The employer will provide DOES with written documentation that the employer has provided the representative of any collective bargaining unit involved with this project a copy of this agreement and has requested comments or objections. If the representative has any comments or objections, the employer will promptly provide them to DOES. The other thing you can do, in addition to this, is if you need to hire, I know you have to go through the union to hire, but at least tell them, can you provide me with a DC resident employee? At least ask the question. Document that you've asked the question to show your good faith effort in complying with this. Maybe they're not able to give you a DC employee, but maybe they are. If you don't ask, you definitely won't get. Okay? And the second paragraph under there has to do with the apprentice program. Again, if you do $500,000 within a 12-month period, you will be required to register an apprenticeship program with the DC Apprenticeship Council. On page 6, at the top I, the employer and DOES may mutually agree to modify this agreement. Any modification shall be in writing, signed by the employer and DOES, and attached to the original agreement. Very similar to what you do with an amended contract. This is a contract, so you can make a modification. Maybe you're going to have to amend your employment plan. So you would amend it during the project. It's not what you thought at the very beginning. That's okay. But you and DOES need to agree on the modification and then sign it. Under training, DOES and the employer may agree to develop skills training and on-the-job training programs as approved by DOES. The training specifications and costs for such training will be mutually agreed upon by the employer and DOES and will be set forth in a separate training agreement. So this is something that you can work with DOES on. This may be something that can be used in what we'll talk about later as an alternate plan. A plan that takes the place of these requirements. Because maybe you know you can't meet these requirements. So you'll come up with an alternate plan. So under the recruitment, this is where it gives things that you need to do to post your job openings. You'll post it on dcnetworks.org, a minimum of 10 days. They do have a phone number there if you need assistance doing this. You're going to notify DOES of all new jobs created for the project within at least 7 business days. It's going to include the number of employees needed, the job title, the qualifications and specific skills needed to perform the job, the date that you need to hire these people by, the rate of pay you're willing to pay, the hours that they're going to work, if it's going to be a permanent position or a temporary position, the duration of employment, and a description of exactly what they're going to do while they're working for you. And then the last sentence there, this must be done before using any other referral source. DOES definitely wants you to go through them first. It says in here that the employer will submit to DOES prior to beginning work on the project a list of current employees. The employment plans always had a list of your current employees, and the employment plan for the 51% new hires still does. But this one does not include the list of all your current employees. Okay? That doesn't mean they won't see it, because you have to put in LCB Tracker the hire date when you enter the employee. So it's still going to be there. They're still going to see the hire date of this employee. Okay? So when you ask DOES for referrals for employees, they are going to screen the applicants for you to make sure that the applicants have all the things that you desire. And I'm going to tell you, be very specific in what you ask DOES for as far as the skills and qualifications for your worker. If you want a veteran worker, then say, I'd like to hire a veteran. Make sure that they know everything that you want to look for, because that will help them weed out potential people that you don't want to waste your time with. But you will have the opportunity to then interview all these candidates. The decision is yours. Just because they make a referral doesn't mean you have to hire that person. They might refer you a dozen people, and none of them are the kind of person that you want. That's okay, but document that you met with those 12 people. Hopefully they've given you resumes, or you can, use the referral slip from DOES, whatever they give you. Document when you met with each person, what was the discussion like. Help DOES understand that I couldn't hire any of these people because they didn't have this that I needed, whatever this is. It will be different for all of you. Okay? Did you have a question, Maria?
Yeah, one of the big components that I found in going through the referrals is whether they have transportation to get to the job. So that is something that, we really don't think about. But, when you're interviewing, they're like, well, I can get to this job because I can take the bus. And I'm just like, okay. But then you may have that person because obviously if you hire someone, there's money involved there. You're trying to train them.
Right.
So you want to get somebody that can be an employee, not just for that job.
Right.
Ideally. So that was one of the components that we always ask, whether they have transportation.
All right, if you can't hear, Maria's saying that one of the things that she likes to ask for is whether they have transportation, because she's found that people who don't have transportation, maybe they can get to this particular job, but then they can't get to another job for you. And hiring someone is an investment, so you don't want to just continually hire. So it may be a good idea to put has own transportation on your list of qualifications for your DOES referrals. All right? Anything else? Mm-hmm.
So our company does jobs all the way from Connecticut all the way down to DC. Can one of the requirements be that the new hire be able to travel all the way through, let's say, Connecticut down to DC. Obviously, they're a real DC resident, but can the condition of hire be that they be able to work in multiple different states?
And that's a requirement for your company, for everybody else, everywhere else?
Most of our employees are from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, and they go from Connecticut down to DC.
Uh-huh.
Every single one. So if that is all right, then, so in other words, if that's a bona fide requirement for our company, if we have our crew, in 3 years we haven't fired a single person. So if that is the standard that we have, is that a valid requirement?
I wouldn't be able to answer that question for DOES, but it's a good question, and we'll be sure to try to answer it and get the answer back to all of you. He's asking if because his company does a lot of business from Connecticut all the way down the coastline to DC, is it reasonable to ask that this employee be able to go anywhere in that region, wherever they do work? So, it may be a situation, I'm just saying, I don't know for sure. It may be a situation where you just hired for this project, and that's it. And at the end of the project, you lay them off. But because transportation is an issue for people in DC a lot of the time. So all hiring decisions, though, are made by the employer. You get to make that decision. You're the one that has to pay this employee. It's your right to make the decision who you hire. But the fact that you've gone through DOES and you're documenting that and showing a good faith effort, and they might send you another round of 12 people before they issue a letter saying that we can't find anybody that meets your requirements. But if they truly can't find anybody, they will write you a letter. That letter does not get you out of meeting the requirements, the percentage requirements. It means that they couldn't help you. Okay? So that's in section B right there, the very last sentence, what I just said. In section C, if you hire one of the referrals from DOES, in this section, DOES is saying that they have no responsibility for the actions of that employee while they're on your job site or in your employ. So, under the reporting requirements, I'm just talking about here the projects that have the percentage of DC resident hours worked. So under the reporting requirements for this type of project, you will be reporting your certified payroll in LCP Tracker, and that will take care of all your reporting requirements. Weekly reporting in certified payroll for LCP Tracker. All right, so LCP Tracker for any job that has over 5 million in DC government assistance, expect LCP Tracker. If it is the 51% of new hires law, you will be probably filing paper reports. It won't be LCP Tracker. Okay? The 51% hiring requirements jobs, however, do have reporting that's required. This is an online reporting that is through the DOES portal, and they have a FORS system, F-O-R-R-S. That's what they call it. And actually, just this month, they've rolled out an updated FORS system that is going to be required for the reporting for the month of August, which will be due September 10th. It's always due the 10th day no later than the 10th day of the month following the reporting month. So the new FORS system that they just came out with, for this August report that's due no later than September 10th, they're going to ask you a new question that hasn't been on here before. They want to know the direct and indirect labor costs. So for the month of August, on Bread for the City, they want you to report everything you've done so far through the end of August on this September 10th due date report. And then each month after that, you'll report your direct and indirect labor costs, whatever they are. Okay? So remember, we went through the definitions of those earlier. All right? Again, in F, they're talking about double counting the hard-to-employ people. We went through that list of the hard-to-employ and the definitions. If there is a construction project that does not have Davis-Bacon, and therefore no certified payroll, it doesn't go exactly this way. They're saying in here that the employer shall submit monthly documents of workers employed on the project. But we have currently 2 projects that the percentage of labor hours requirement is in effect. So this first source agreement that we're talking about is in effect, but there is no certified payroll. You still have to report in LCB Tracker, but because there's no certified payroll, the only minimum that they're putting in to the system is the DC living wage. You're probably aware that there is a DC living wage, and I will tell you it's $14.50 an hour right now. And I do expect that it will go up on January 1st. Each year on January 1st, that is adjusted. Unlike the Davis-Bacon, which is good for the entire project, the DC living wage does adjust every January 1st. So because it's $14.50 now when your project started, doesn't mean you might not see an increase next year that you'll be responsible for. All right? So you're going to submit the weekly payrolls in LCB Tracker. The only time that you might have to submit paper reports, certified payroll reports for this type of project is that it seems to take a long time to get an additional classification. So if you turn in an additional classification request for your certified payroll, it comes to Hamel. Hamel has to send it to the DC agency. This is usually DHCD. DHCD has to review it, approve it, and send it on to the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor has to review it and see what they say about it. As you know, they can approve it, or they can say, no, we don't approve this rate, we think it should be this much, which is never going to be an amount lower than the amount you requested. But at that point, when they come back, it's got to go from the Department of Labor to the agency to Hamel, and then we get it to you as soon as we get it. So we will let you know at that time it was approved or it was not approved. If it's not approved, then restitution is going to be due on it. And then you have to go through the restitution process. But because that process takes a longer time, DOES cannot get that wage into the LCP tracker until it's approved. They can't just put your request in. It has to wait until it's approved. So therefore, there could be a fairly lengthy delay in your reporting in LCP tracker. So we may require paper reporting in the interim, and then when that pay rate does come through, you'll have to put it in LCP tracker and get everything updated so that the whole project is in LCP tracker. We don't really like to make you guys do that, but it's just the way things are sometimes. All right. In I, it also says that the employers are required to make payroll records available to DOES as part of compliance monitoring. They'll ask for you to have it at the job site. If you have a DC office, they may be willing to come to your DC office. Okay? Now we get to the final report and good faith efforts. We talked about good faith efforts being exhaustive before. In number 2, it says, submit to DOES a request for a waiver of the hiring or hours worked percentage requirements for all jobs created by the project that will include the following documentation. They want documentation of all your good faith efforts, the referrals provided by DOES and any other referral sources, any advertisements that you did with DOES and any other sources, including newspapers, etc. I do not want you to wait until the end of the project to do this. If you don't think that you can meet the hour requirements, we're going to come up with an alternate plan at the beginning of the project that are going to change this document. But to come up with an alternate plan means that it has to benefit DC workers. There has to be a benefit there because that's what this is all about. This is to benefit DC workers. And because this law with the percentage of hours worked requirements has meat to it, your alternate plan is going to have some meat to it. It's going to have to take some effort. It's not going to be just a, well, let me do this. Let me just do this. No, it's going to have some meat to it. You can be creative. There are things that you probably can do very well that these DC workers would need. Potential DC workers.
Have you done any alternate contracts?
Hamel has an alternate plan in place right now, even though Hamel is able to meet these percentage requirements. But I know that Hamel does not have as many employees on the job as you guys do. Because what we actually perform is less as far as the workers that are on certified payroll reports. A lot of ours is supervision, so we don't have a lot of people on the certified payroll reports. But we do have an alternate plan in place anyway with the district. We're going to, for the next 2 years, do some OSHA training in DC, 30-hour certificates. We'll start with the 10, and if the person wants to continue, that course will just continue so that they can get 30 hours. And we're going to do the classes at DOES so that DC workers can come down and get the training that they need. We have been down to DOES a few times lately. One of the times that I went down there, I went down with some subcontractors. It was the end of the project. The project was done. They had not met the goals. Specifically, one of the subcontractors gave their explanation to the folks there at DOES. And when DOES people heard this explanation, they simply looked at the person and said, I wish you had come and explained this to us at the beginning of the project. I cannot stress how important it is. If you know you can't meet the requirements, let's talk about it at the beginning. Let's find some other way. Let's do some explaining. Tell them our situation. Make sure they know. Make sure we work with them and figure it out. And Hamel will be there with you every step of the way. Hamel is fully invested in this from the president right on down. That's why you see a lot of Hamel people here today. They're learning about it just like you guys are. We're trying to make sure that we're all working together. We do not want any of you, and I would probably get the email first. I don't want to have to call any of you or have you get the email that I'm copied on that says, this company has not met the percentage hour worked requirements. But I'm not going to wait until the end of the project to hear that news anyway, because Hamel is going to monitor your progress from the moment you step on site. And we're going to be monitoring your percentages from the very beginning. And if we see that you're short, we're going to call you in right away to talk to us, because we want to remedy that situation. Now, maybe you know you're short, and maybe it's just the way your work evolves, and this DC person is going to come in at this point, and so then all your hours are going to work out, and the percentage is going to be just fine, because this person was only here for 2 weeks to get the job started, but this guy then takes over, and he's there for 6 weeks, and he's a DC resident, so now you have more than 20% of your total hours are done. But we want to make sure that you're in compliance throughout the project. So you might have reasons, and that's great. But if you don't have reasons and you're just behind, we want to do something about it right then. Even when you give this employment plan to estimating, you're going to know at that time when you're bidding on the project, putting in your proposal, you're going to know whether you can meet this requirement or not, because you know where your workforce lives. How many of them live in DC? How many of them don't? You know what's going to happen. So that was our idea in having this training today, is to make sure you know what the rules are, and now you can plan for not only one project, but all your future DC projects, to plan on how you're going to come up with a way to meet the requirements. Maybe you can't meet the requirements based on this agreement, but at this point, we can start working on a plan, an alternate plan, that we can then present to DOES, and if DOES accepts the plan, these requirements can go away. But like I said, the plan's going to have some meat to it. And you can be very creative with these plans. DOES might have some suggestions for you. We can meet with DOES and just explain your situation, and they might have some suggestions. I know the last time I was down there, they said that they needed people who knew how to do engine repairs in boats. Well, maybe you don't really work with boats, but the guys that know how to do engine repairs in your equipment might be able to help. If it's a similar kind of engine, you can at least talk to them about it. But that's that's just one thing. There can be something for more people that, more items than there are people in this room. It can be very creative. So DOES is going to be looking at everybody at the end of the job to make sure that there was a good faith effort that was put forth. Everybody turned in their reports. Everybody seemed to be doing everything correctly, advertising for jobs on DC networks, going through the person at the business services department, and what have you, to hire people, or making your alternate plan work. But they're going to be looking at that. There's a whole list here about, in C on page 9, DOES shall consider documentation of the following when making a determination of the good faith effort to comply. They will look at all these items and see if you did those. So this is just a list, a partial list of things that you need to do to demonstrate a good faith effort. They will look at all of this. If you put lettering on your vehicle for new hires, potential new hires, to call this number, we're hiring, call this number, don't just say that you put that information on your vehicles and drove around DC to advertise. Take a picture of it. You got to show them. You can't just tell them. You have to show them. If you placed an ad in the Washington Post or whatever for a worker, you're going to get an invoice from the paper. It's going to say exactly when your advertisement ran. It's probably going to have a copy of the ad. Take a copy of that, give them that to show that you ran this ad for the required amount of time in here. Everything you're doing, document it. Every conversation you have with DOES, document it. Who it was with, what was discussed. Did they give you any suggestions? Did they tell you to do something? Make sure you do it. Tim, do you have a suggestion?
Yes, specifically to number 6, where it says whether the employer contact the churches, unions, and or additional workforce development organizations. Some of you guys and gals may not realize that a lot of the projects that we deal with, the developer or the owner themselves or a partner in the deal are a member of a church. Ask us, because like Providence Place is a job that we just had recently in our estimating department. It's being turned over to project management. That job is, part of it is owned by a church. And a lot of these jobs, the churches say, hey, we have members who want to work on your project, ask us, that at any time. It may just be one small person on that project that's involved in the job somehow, that you may not even ever have heard their name, but we can sometimes put you in the right direction, and especially in the workforce development organizations. We have one in particular that we've been working with fairly closely over the past 6 months, and we've been able to make some connections. So I would definitely stress trying to utilize number 6.
Yep.
A question about number 6, just to tag on to what has been said. If you go to one of these outreaches or workforce development organizations, does that still count as DOES, or does DOES have to know about that before you go and hire somebody from one of these places? Because it's not really the first source.
All right, Jeff is asking if you don't hire through DOES. So it's really okay if you don't hire through DOES. DOES, as long as you hire a DC worker, will say that still does the district good. So we're good with that. Okay? I would say that You know, you could have still put your information on the DC Network's website. Even if you don't hire from there, that's fine. Even if you didn't interview anybody from there that was referred to you, that's fine. As long as you hire enough district residents. 51% for the one law, and then hire enough to meet your percentage requirements on the other. But either way, they want DC people hired. Yes, Dan?
It sounds like some of these companies, Anderson Fire Protection definitely sounds like one that falls into this. Is there a point, like, you have multiple jobs in the district, and they're lined up, they're going pretty steady, and you're having to go through this good faith knowing you're not going to meet it, that you're not going to get enough to hit those goals. Can a company just go straight to, hey, we're looking at this project, we have an alternate plan, and we've worked on this alternate plan that we're basically going to use on all of our projects in the district to go to them to basically save time and save effort to get through each one of the projects?
Right. He's saying that the company has the situation where they know repeatedly they will have the same problem. They don't have the DC workers. It's going to be in effect for all their projects in DC, and they have several projects lined up to do in the district. So yes, I would say you go to the DOES, the people there, with your plan, your alternate plan, and you'd say, I want to put this plan in effect, and I want it to cover my projects. Now, maybe it would cover the projects for 2 years, 5 years. I don't know what DOES will approve or not approve, but certainly it's worth asking to cover multiple projects.
Is it worth going there first to say,
Yes.
what are you looking for?
The earliest, the better.
Sounds kind of, you talked about, boat engines. It sounds like it's pretty broad on.
It can be what the district needs.
Okay.
Whatever the district needs and whatever will benefit the DC workers, that's the way you work out an alternate plan. And like I said, DOES may have some ideas based on what they know your company does. Well, look, we kind of need this. Would you be able to do that? Well, you could say yes, or you could say no and come up with a different plan, and then they'd have to say yes to that plan. But there would be a way that you can work things out. And you don't have to wait to have a contract to do this. You can go and talk to DOES and work out an alternate plan. Explain everything about your business. Lay it out on the table for them. The earlier, the better. They understand this is difficult for people to do, and they're willing to work with all of us. And that's why I'm saying, if we work together and work with DOES and understand what's in here and come up with a plan that has benefit for DC workers that DOES can buy into, it's a win-win for everybody. We don't want anybody to be out in left field here. We want everybody to be in good order. Either you're meeting the requirements or you have an alternate plan in place. The district is going to be monitoring you through the LCP tracker system for your percentage hours worked, through the FORS system for the 51% new hires. They will be monitoring. As I said, Hamill's going to be monitoring as well. as mentioned before, DOES has a right to ask you for records, payroll records, etc. They will be coming out to visit project sites, so they very well may see your workers on the project working. And so don't be surprised if a worker says, yeah, some guy from DOES was out here today. Okay? Non-compliance may result in penalties. I don't want to see anybody in that situation. That's why we're working together. We don't want anybody there. If they think that you have willfully breached this document, the obligations that you have in this document, DOES can penalize you 5% for the total of your direct and indirect labor costs. That's why I went over those definitions, because they do come into play. But that's only if you haven't given it a good faith effort. So you're going to follow the list, the good faith effort list here, and you're going to document what you do so that you can show them, yeah, I did good faith effort. I tried to hire. I did all my reporting for the project. I was trying to comply. Okay, fine, good faith effort. They can also fine if we haven't met the percentages of hours. So the worst case scenario is that you have workers in all 4 of the categories: journey worker, skilled laborer, apprentice, and common laborer. But none of them were DC residents. So you have 0 DC worker hours, and the rest are all non-DC. So worst case scenario, your penalty would be calculated based on the sum of the direct and indirect labor costs again, multiplied by 1/8 of 1% times 201, which is the total of those 4 percentages, the 4 percentage requirements. So that can add up in a hurry. Most of you probably aren't going to have workers in all 4 categories. And if you do have maybe, say, a journey worker or some journey workers, the requirement is 20%, but maybe you have 10%. And you don't have any other 3 kinds of workers. Well, instead of being multiplied by the 201, it's only going to be multiplied by 10, the difference between the 10% that you do have and the 20% that's required. So, at any rate, that's going to be only the difference between the requirement and what you actually got. That will be what's there. But again, none of you are going to be in this predicament because we're going to work together and nobody's going to be there. Some people might think, well, it's easier for me to just pay the penalty and be done with it. But if you look on page 11, section B, it says employers who have been found in violation 2 times or more over a 10-year period, that's a long time, may be debarred and or deemed ineligible for consideration for projects for a period of 5 years. So there's an awful lot of business in the district. To not be able to work in the district for 5 years is a big penalty to pay. Not to mention the penalty that you paid because you thought that was the easy way out. So don't do it that way. We want you to be able to work for us. So you can appeal this, but it's difficult, you know. It's not a way I would recommend. How are we doing? Okay. So we're going to go on to the revised employment plan. But I will tell you that I included in your packet that you received, it's at the back, I included this. This is your cheat sheet. At the very top of the page, it has the types of requirements for the two different first source agreements, whether it's under 5 million or 5 million and over. And then I wanted to have an easy sheet for you to keep that has the good faith effort defined. So you don't have to dig to the back of your document to find it, it's right here. And on the back of this, I just put some information about the living wage and a little bit about LCP Tracker. Okay? The revised first source employment plan. This is called a revised plan because there used to be just one plan, and they recently revised it. And so they are calling this the revised plan. This is the only plan that they will accept with your first source agreements now. Although, as I said, there is a different revised plan for the 51% requirements. The one you have that we gave you today and sent emailed to you is for the percentage worked hours projects only. Okay? A lot of the information on the first page is the same that was on the first page of the other document. A lot of it will be filled in for you. You will need to put in your employer contract amount, your employer start date, and your employer end date in the top section. And you then, in the second section, all your employer information will need to be done again. It should be checked off for you that yes, you are a subcontractor, and the prime contractor's name should be entered in there. Again, if this information is not on your first source agreement documents, when you receive them after you have been awarded the contract, call the compliance person that sent this to you, or you can call me. But this should be filled out. I do not want you signing any document that's not fully completed.
In estimating, we need to fill out one for each job to send to the subcontractors.
Yep.
So that, because that would be kind of in conflict with what you're saying, because right now we send out blank forms to.
Well, at least in the first section, Tim, there is project name. So we would at least know the project name and that information. So that should be filled out.
And we can check the box of prime contractor will meet hours worked percentage requirements for each subcontractor.
Per subcontractor. Yep.
So we have to do that for every project.
Yep.
Okay.
And remember, there's two different employment plans. So you'll know by the employment plan. The other one does say 51% at the top. So if it's this one that doesn't say 51%, this is the one that applies to the hours worked. But you'll know that right away because on page 2, we're going to start in with that. I do want to just caution you that you need to initial at the bottom of every page in this part of the document. The first part of the document doesn't have that, but this part does. So on page 2, you're going to put in the total number of hours for each of the 4 categories on the left side of the page. The total number of hours that you think your job is going to take in each category. And then to the right, in the middle you'll put the trades, but then to the right, how many of those hours are going to be performed by DC residents? And the percentages are right there at the top of the heading for each of the 4 categories of what the requirements are. Page 3 is the hiring projections. You need to indicate all the positions that you think that you'll need to hire for this project. It doesn't mean necessarily that if you put a position down here and you end up, oh, I don't need him because this didn't go through that I thought I was going to use this guy on, so now I can use him over here. So maybe you won't need that person, but you may need to tell DOES that, because DOES is going to look at this and say, oh, well, XYZ company said on their employment plan that they were going to hire 3 people and they only hired 2. So you may be asked why you didn't hire the 3rd one, or you might just contact DOES and say, hey, I need to amend my employment plan because I know I'm not going to hire 3, I'm only going to hire 2. Okay? And then this can be amended. Page 4 is the justification. If you have not indicated at all that you're going to hire anybody on page 3, and we're not saying definitely that you have to hire, but if you've not indicated that you're hiring anyone, then you have to fill out this justification page. It can be as simple as, I have enough workers in my workforce currently to handle this job, and I will not need to hire any new people. However, I would add just a little bit to that. Just so DOES knows that you understand the law, I would say something like, if I need to hire for this job, I will contact DOES first. Doesn't mean you have to hire anybody, it just means that you're telling DOES that you understand what this first source agreement is all about. Okay? Part D is where it gets a little bit tougher. The answers differ for every company. You know your scope of work. You know, the office people don't, but your project managers and people who do the scheduling for the project, they might have to help you with this. Some of these questions, though, once you get done doing it the first time, the answer is going to be pretty much similar. You might have to tweak some numbers or tweak some time a little bit, but the flow of your work is probably similar on a lot of projects. So if you have indicated that you're going to hire, make sure you put your hiring schedule in this part number 1. All right? Provide descriptions of skill requirements by job title or position, including industry-recognized certifications required for the different positions. This is not dealing with new hires. This is dealing with all the people you are going to put on this project to do work for your company. So, we're going to have 5 common laborers and give a little job description of what you're going to have them do on the project. Okay? 3 is provide a strategy to fill the hours required to be worked by DC residents, including a component on communicating those requirements to contractors and subcontractors, and a component on potential community outreach partnerships with the University of District of Columbia, the University of the District of Columbia Community College, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? If you know right out of the box that you cannot meet the requirements, this is the time to come up with an alternate plan. You don't maybe have to have your alternate plan, you don't have to describe the alternate plan fully right here, but you could say, I can't meet the requirements, but I am creating an alternate plan, and I will be in touch with DOES to present. Maybe by a certain date, depending on, your start date.
Does that go in the justification sheet? Where do you indicate that on this form?
I'm on page 5, question 3.
Okay, so the alternate plan statement will go down there?
Yep. Question 4 on page 6, they want you to tell what your strategy is going to be if you fall behind. How are you going to make this up? How will you recover? Question 5 should be filled in for you. This should be the Hamel project manager for the project. Question 6, they want you to describe all the fringe benefits that you have for your employees. Medical, 401k, pension, whatever you have. Holiday, vacation, all those things. 7, provide a strategy to ensure that district residents who work on the project receive ongoing employment and training opportunities after they complete the work on this project. They do want you to hire and keep people employed, but that's not always possible. Some people have written in this place that it depends on our workload at the time. I haven't received those back saying that that's not an acceptable answer. So they're not promising to keep newly hired people on board, but that's something that the district does want to happen. It's kind of gone back and forth on new hires. At times they want people to have long-term employment, and at times it seems like the only thing they look at is the number of people hired. And if they're looking at the number of people hired, you can't help but lay them off once they're done with that project and then rehire others for the next project because they just want numbers. But this question seems to ask in a way that they want to see long-term employment. So it goes back and forth sometimes. They would like you to hire graduates of the DC public schools, the charter schools, and community-based job training providers, and the hard-to-employ residents. Now remember, the hard-to-employ residents are the ones that you can double count the hours up to a maximum of 15% of your total hours on the project. Number 9, if you have had any penalties with DOES on first source agreements, they would want you to say, yeah, I had a penalty. I don't want any of you to have to say that, at least from here on out. Otherwise, you can say, I worked on 3 projects that had first source percentage work requirements and was able to meet the percentages, or I've worked on these projects and submitted an alternative plan successfully. Question 10, just acknowledge here that you need to turn in weekly certified payroll. It's just an acknowledgement. They just want you to know. And then the last page you sign. As we talked about before, Hamel is trying very hard to make sure that everybody is in a position to be successful in this. The first thing we're doing is with estimating, and you're going to get that employment plan, and you're going to fill it out for the project that you're putting a proposal in on, assuming that you get the contract. But, you know, your numbers and everything will still be a part of that, still be a process. Everybody else is going to fill that out too. So we do want you to start there. When you get your contract, you should get an affirmative action packet with the first source agreement in it pretty shortly after you get your contract through the Procore system. The affirmative action packet will be emailed to you, not through the Procore system. So, but we will email it to you. If you have any questions about that packet, please contact the person who emailed it to you. We're all here to help you answer any questions. If it looks like we've checked a wrong box or haven't filled in something, please contact us. We want everything to be right. So, from the time you start on your work, Hamel will be monitoring your percentages through LCP Tracker, the same way that DOES monitors. And we'll be in touch with you if we see that you're falling behind. Again, if you know you cannot meet the requirements, sorry. If you know you cannot meet the requirements, we're going to work together right away, because we're going to communicate, we're going to be in touch with each other, we're going to know, and then we're going to brainstorm, we're going to come up with a plan. We're going to present the plan to DOES, and Hamel will go with you. We will be supportive of you. We will, make sure that we get this approved so that everybody knows that the original plan is no longer in effect for your company. And you have an alternate plan. And this is how you're going to satisfy the first source agreement. Okay? Yes, question.
In your experience, how proficient is DOES at actually finding the workers? So, for example, most of our residents are from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. I think we can meet the common labor requirements, even skilled labor requirements. If you have to hires in the DC area, that's okay. But when it comes to, let's say, apprentices or journeymen, our industry, we're in the glazing industry. Finding the journeyman glazer is almost impossible. We have enterprise all the way from New York City to here, and maybe we have 4 employees that are qualified as journeymen. So if they can find us, we'll gladly hire them at any time. But I just don't know historically how, I guess, aggressive they are in terms of pushing their job postings.
Well, I would certainly start there, asking them for the referral, but I wouldn't give it a lot of time before I would start thinking of an alternate plan. And you can contact us to start meeting about it and talking about it, and we'll just go from there. The thing is, and I keep running it over in my head, like I said, when I went down there and DOES said to the subcontractor who explained their position, how their business worked and what personnel they already had, and they had a limited number of employees. And DOES, I wish you had told us that at the beginning. We could have worked something out. So the key is communication from the start. Don't wait until the end of the project when they can't do anything for you. They can't put an alternate plan in place for you at the end of the project. If you get to the end of the project and that's when your change order comes through that takes you over $300,000, you're not going to have to put an alternate plan in place. They're going to understand. You're just going to have to be in touch with them to let them know. Okay? But Hamel believes in you. We believe you all can do it. We believe together we can do it. And we will help you in any way we can. Jeff?
I had a couple questions on the 0 to 500, or to 5 million, the 51% new hire. Is there a minimum contract value where this will apply? What is it? Is it starting 300,000 on that too?
Yes. No matter...
Anybody under 300,000 doesn't have to sign any kind of first.
No.
Okay.
So the first source agreements, no matter which law it is, you need a contract of 300,000 or more in order to be obligated to sign a first source agreement. So if your contract is less than that, then no worries.
So what's the penalty for not complying on those projects? Is it the same kind of procedure, 5%, or?
Yeah,
If you don't hire anybody for the job, then there is no penalty because you didn't hire anybody. But
right. There would still be a 5% penalty, I'm sure.
and is there, like, everybody's supposed to have an apprenticeship program if you do over $500,000? Is there a penalty for not having an apprenticeship program?
Okay, his question now is there a penalty for not having an apprenticeship program? I don't know the answer to this 100%, but I am guessing that you wouldn't be allowed to do business in the district. Because DOES will contact you when they think you've done $500,000 in a year, and they will say, you have to have an apprenticeship program. And so if you delay, or just flat out tell them, no, I'm not doing that, they're going to say, well, then you're not doing business in the district. We're going to put you on our debarment list. Yes?
We just had that last week with a subcontractor who was a CE, and they were not participating in an apprenticeship program, and they're at risk of losing their CE certification right now.
Yeah. The district would not look highly on somebody who, by law, is required to have an apprenticeship program and does not have one. Yes?
So for a flooring company, we use all subcontractors. So if we're using all subcontractors, how are we supposed to have an apprenticeship program if we are not employing the laborers directly?
That would be a question for DOES, and Aletta Samuels at DOES is the person in charge of the apprenticeship program. I will try to find out an answer for you. His question is that he doesn't really have workers. He subcontracts to have the flooring done, and therefore he doesn't have workers to have an apprenticeship program. But he might have contracts more than $500,000 in the district, so that DOES thinks that he needs to have an apprenticeship program. So DOES would still want him to have an apprenticeship program, but he doesn't have anybody to train. So we would have to talk to DOES.
Anybody to train them.
Right. And the flooring, it's interesting, the flooring subcontractors, there aren't really any training programs for flooring people in any apprenticeship program. So I actually had this conversation with Aletta Samuels last week, that a subcontractor in flooring needing an apprenticeship program would have to do it themselves, provide their own training. She would provide them the scope of what the program needs to have. She said it would be a 2-year flooring program. The employer would have to do it themselves and create their own curriculum based on the scope that she gives them. And that would all have to be approved. Yes.
Just out of curiosity, so the apprentice program, historically, we never met the $500,000 threshold for DC projects. Came close, but that project's been going, but we never had to do so. But I assume that apprentice program, the location has to be within DC.
Yes. This apprenticeship program that would be required by DC would have to be approved by the DC Apprenticeship Council. And you would have to put DC workers in this program. So it would really be a DC-based program.
Because we are in the process of making Pennsylvania,
Right.
open office, DC. That's trying to figure out the logistics behind it. I mean, because Glazers, it's like Ford, there's no
Now,
training
I
program.
mean, you can bring those Pennsylvania workers down to work in DC,
Right.
but the thing is, if it was a percentage hours worked requirements, then you've got apprentices on the job that aren't DC residents, so you don't want that.
Oh, no, no.
You don't want to put those
Well, I mean,
people on there.
The way I'm thinking about it is, I mean, if we do get enough jobs, let's say DC, we're
Yeah.
happy to open an office down here because we do much more business in Maryland.
Uh-huh.
But obviously DC is closer to Maryland, Oakland, all over Pennsylvania.
Right.
So, I mean, we wouldn't have any objection to seriously considering opening a training program down here.
Right.
But it's just, like, we just never had thought of it, but I don't.
Yep.
It's a requirement.
So, yes, Dan?
Well, back to the flooring situation. So, if you've got a tier sub, and they're making over, you're using that same tier sub on multiple projects over a year, they're gonna have to have the apprentices. So
Yep.
could
Depending
we
on how much.
get that by default, because, you see what I mean?
Well, I mean, certainly DC would be asking who your tier subs are, and if they figured out that those tier subs then needed an apprenticeship program, then,
That's gonna be next to cost.
yeah.
And that's 500,000 over a calendar year?
Yes.
Or over
12 months.
12 consecutive month period?
It said it. It said 12 months.
And another question, have you seen people use POs as their addresses instead of like physical addresses, but they still live in DC?
I think you have to put in a physical address for the employees, not a PO box. He's asking, does a PO box in DC work? They also ask for LCP tracker, what their driver's license is, the state of it, and the license number. They're verifying whether they're a DC resident or not. I'm looking up for that. I know it said 12 months. I don't know that it said a calendar year. With a single contract or cumulative contracts of at least 500,000 within a 12-month period. 12 consecutive months, but not a calendar year necessarily. That's on page 5. So, anyway, we want to work with you guys. We don't want anybody to be incurring penalties. We don't want you to be afraid to do First Source. We want to be able to do DC business because they have a lot of business for us. There's a lot of money in DC. So,
And that's kind of the spirit of the whole thing, is that there's a lot of projects, i.e. money in the district. The district is giving money to developers to encourage them to do work in the district, and they feel like by giving that money out, that they want district residents, they want local residents working on the project. That's the spirit of the whole program, right?
yeah, they want district residents to benefit from these projects.
And a district resident is somebody within the city limits only, correct?
Yes.
They don't do like a hub zone, or anything. They don't do anything like that. Proximity.
Yeah, I keep seeing this Washington Metropolitan Statistical Area.
Capitol Heights does not.
That doesn't mean for the new hires. All right? But I appreciate your time.
When it comes to 51% of new hires, the first project that employee touches, they're a new hire to that project. So even if you hire them for the First Source project and they touch another project for one day, and then the very next day they started on the DC project, right? They will not be considered a new hire. They will be considered transfers.
Project, for the fours or for the 51%?
For the 51%, which is monitored under the Ford system.
Yeah.
And that's for any contract that receives government funds under $5 million.
This is kind of a devil's advocate question with that. Then couldn't you, to avoid having to ever do that new hire people, put them on another project for a day and then transfer them over?
Elaborate a little bit on that one.
So you hire somebody, for this project A, okay?
And is that person a DC resident?
Well, it doesn't matter at this point. You need to hire somebody, right?
Right.
And according to the fours, you have to hire at least one DC resident because it has to be at least 51%. You need to hire one. Couldn't you avoid doing that by hiring a Maryland resident, putting them on a project B, and then transferring them over?
Transfer them.
From
Maryland
project B to
over?
project A, so they're not actually a new hire, they're just a transferred employee.
They wouldn't be, which is correct. But then at that case, you're trying to, and if found out, you're trying to cheat the system.
Well, I'm just asking because even if he was a DC appointment, he wouldn't count towards a new hire anyway.
You're
if he worked
absolutely
somewhere.
right. You're absolutely right. But we also look at, the Ford system also calculates transfers. So it also look at the amount of transfers that you have. And then also in your employment plan, you would list, if you, let's say, for instance, you had, this is where it would come into play. In your employment plan, you were to list that as a result of this project, we are expecting one new hire, and this is a new position. So at the end of the project, if we're looking and we say, okay, well, you were expecting this one new hire, it's listed in your employment plan, this is the rate of pay, this is when you're gonna hire, this is the position, so on and so forth. The end of the project comes, and we don't see a new hire, then there's something,
Right.
something is obviously wrong there. So then we can come back to you and say, okay, after a compliance review, after the closeout of the project, you stated that you're gonna have a new hire. Payroll records now show, if we go ahead and request payroll records, that you did have a new hire, and it was actually a Maryland resident, and what you did was just transfer them, then we'll add that back into the calculations, and then you'll be under the threshold.
No, yeah, I was just wondering because how you said that he wouldn't count.
Trust me,
Count.
many try to, the government is
Yeah.
something to not play with. Yes.
So, I guess I need to understand how to appropriately communicate that, because our philosophy is to not just hire new people and keep them on a limited term. Our philosophy is once we hire them, is to keep them employed. So, we try to move, when the job is ended, move them to a new job as opposed to hiring someone for 5 or 6 months. We want to keep the people we've hired as our employees as long as we possibly can. So we don't hire a person necessarily new, we move them from one job to the next job so that we can keep them gainfully employed. So how do we effectively, outside of the employment plan, but communicate that when it comes to the forest systems and those things that are calculating and determining whether you're meeting your goals? And we think our approach is more effective for the district and for the person, and instead of doing it the way that the paperwork suggests you should.
So essentially, when you hire an employee, you're hiring the best candidate out of all your screens, you're hiring the best candidate to fill the job. And you're looking for that candidate to last within your company, and possibly grow within your company. And as you stated, you want to retain that individual and you're transferring them to other projects, not letting them go so you can create a new position. That's great. When you are submitting your employment plan, and because you've now retained enough employees where you do not need to hire, you basically list that on your employment plan. Any employment projections, I would state there's no new hires, and I've seen it many times come across my desk. There's no new hires as a result of this project. You have to. The problem is you have a lot of contractors that see that, they leave it blank, they don't explain. I mean, when you have that, it's left to us to now, okay, what's going on here? Did you have a new hire? Did you not have a new hire? And that's when you dig deeper. But when you do explain, and when you do go further into the justification sheet and explain as justification, there are no, we need not to create any new positions as a result of this project. We retain the current employees we have, and then it gives you another form where you list all the current employees that you have. So that way you've covered all your bases. Because you don't have to necessarily hire. It's not saying that you have to hire. If you don't have a position to create, we cannot force you to just create a position. Yes, sir.
Yeah, in the event that the example that you gave of a project being delayed, and you send that person to another project. So there's a suggestion, if you don't need them on that project, but you're holding them, because you hired them out of the community to work on a particular project that's mandated in the community, is your suggestion to fire the person and wait until?
What was that? Fire.
I mean, but that's my point.
Fire was the F, you said, right?
No, that's my, I'm a DC resident, DC contractor, been 20-something years. I understand what the program is doing, and I applaud what they're trying to do. But when we hire someone out of the community and the project gets stalled, and we send them to another project, they may even mess up the ratio, because as an electrical contractor, there's a 3-to-1 ratio. So it damages the ratio, so you can't necessarily have them, because now you've got too many apprentices to journeymen. So you're violating that obligation. And you can't send them to another project. You can't have a 1-to-1 on a project because it violates the labor requirement. What is the district's answer for that? Because your only option then is to be in violation and get fined by the labor board, or to release a person.
Well, let me ask you a question. So that employee that you hired, so we're saying this employee, this said employee is an apprentice. That's what it seems like I'm getting, right? And you hire your goal was to hire the apprentice to place them on a first source job.
Correct.
Okay. And because the first source job was delayed, you then transfer them so they can get some experience on another project. Now that you transfer them to another project, that project already has an apprentice, and now you have 2 apprentices, and you have, I'm guessing, 2 journeymen.
I have 2 and 2, yeah. That's better.
I'll tell you this. I am very knowledgeable and very resourceful when it comes to first source compliance. A part of first source compliance is apprenticeship. My counterpart, which would be Ms. Aletta Samuels, is very, very, very resourceful in the apprenticeship area. I stand my ground, and she respects that because I don't speak out of what I don't know. And I wouldn't want to start giving you, if you do this, if you do that, and later on say, well, you know, I was at a training and Omar stated this and we did this and this was the result. Because I may give you the incorrect information, and I don't want to do that. So, sticking to first source, I can give you all the correct information. But I can hook you up with Ms. Samuels, or I can take that question and I can take your email and I can contact you with the answer to that. And anyone else that has any apprentice questions in depth like that. I really don't like talking out of what I don't know, and that's just how I operate. But, let's say this, right? You hire the employee, even if they're an apprentice. You move them to another project, then the first source project opens up. You're able to start that project. Well, this employee is now a transfer. It's not a new hire anymore. You can amend your employment plan and submit documentation to the US stating that we did have a projection as such. We did hire her for this position. This is the person we hired. But because of delays, we transferred this individual, we put this individual on another project to keep them employed. Once this project opened up, we then transferred them to that project. You also have in your employment plan, there are sections that you are able to, and that's the one Leanne has here, where you're able to actually write justifications. And I know this employment plan is being submitted prior to all of that, so you're projecting all these things, right? So the best case scenario is you're gonna have a first source monitor. You're gonna have an apprenticeship monitor. You're gonna contact that person, and you're gonna explain that to that person. The number one thing about compliance, and I tell everybody, is cover your ass. Excuse me, but dot all your I's and cross all your T's. If you have all your documentation and you can support that, that is key. I've been in sessions with this many and more subcontractors that, as a result of a project, they were not meeting their hours of work percentages. And when it comes to good faith efforts, I've had, Anderson Fire is here because they're on site. It came right to me, and it came to me with a thick binder. It stated, there are my good faith efforts. And that was everything detailed as you wanted to see it. So when you have that, then that creates a better case for you. So I just say document everything that you can do, just document.
I have a question.
Mhm.
Once the subcontractor submit their first source, I send it to you, it gets executed. They can amend after that, and
They
the
can.
process just resending it back to you.
They can.
Mhm.
You don't even have to go through where they have to directly have to resubmit and do all of that stuff all over again. If you need to supply additional information and say, Mr. Chambers, as a result, or Mr. Washington, or whomever, as a result of X, Y, Z, here's an amendment to the first source agreement. Can I have this placed in the individual's file? Now,
It's really fast. New hire versus transfer.
uh-huh.
Is a person only a new hire that first day that they walk onto a project? I mean, what's the term of a new hire? It just says newly hired.
So, a new hire, as a result of a first source project, the way we look at a new hire is an individual that was hired to work on that first source project, that stepped on that job site day one. You hired them August 1st, and they started work August 29th. They are a new hire. Even though they were hired August 1st, they didn't work on any other project until August 29th, they are a new hire. You have a 90-day window. The only thing that's going to make them a transfer is if they touch another project prior. And I've been in, you may, and this is something that you may see in Fords if you're in Ford. You may have an employee that is actually not a new hire. And because it's the first time that you are entering them into the system, the first time that you're uploading them as an employee to your company, and their hire date may have been, as we say, August 1st. They may have started working August 5th on another project, and it started on your project August 29th. But because it's the first time you're entering that individual into the Ford system, they report as a new hire. And at the end of the project, we're looking at new hires, and let's say the individual is a Maryland resident, and it brought your new hire percentages down. At that point, either I would reach out to you or you would reach out to me and say, hey, why is it shown as a new hire and this is not a new hire? I will then request additional documentation for you. Supply me with timesheets verifying that that employee has worked on another project prior to this first source project. If you can provide that and document that, I will then make that adjustment so that that new hire actually is a transfer, not a new hire.
You said they have to work on a project before the first source project starts or before you transfer them to the first source project?
If they've worked on a project before you transfer them to the first source project, they're transferred. Mhm. Yes.
So in that case, why wouldn't I work that employee on that project just for a day? Let them go to another project because there's no more work on that project and then bring him back. Then wouldn't that be a new hire for that project?
No,
Oh, it still would, but
no. The day one that
If they
employee
were-
touches any project, they are a new hire to that project.
yeah, so if we, let's say we hired someone for the project X, which is the first source project,
Mhm.
and that project is now not starting for 2 months. I would rather spend money for him to go on projects and do some small work on that project,
On project X,
on project
the
X.
first source project.
First source project,
Okay.
for 1 day, 2 days, whatever work
Yep,
is left.
and then transfer him to another project and allow him to work. He'll
And
be-
then when this starts.
He will still be considered a new hire because it's cumulative, so
Okay.
he will be considered a new hire
It's a new
still.
hire, okay.
Yep,
Yeah, then that's, we would rather do that than be out of compliance.
right, right.
But if there's no work activity on that project
Uh-huh.
whatsoever, that employee did not work on that project.
But there always is, right, go put carpet in trailer, project work, like small stuff, work on the trailer, electrical guy on the trailer.
That's possible.
Right,
But again,
I-
the trailer is not on the job site.
I understand,
There's no activity
I understand.
So, and I want to think that, and I know you guys, the subcontractors, will be doing business with other general contractors as well. So you may be working on projects that are 51% new hires, which are under the $5 million threshold. But when you are by a high percentage from what I see come across my desk, if you're working on a Hamel project, and especially my projects that are slated we have Mass Place, I think the only one is Bradford City that's under.
That's our only project that's
Right.
under.
So we have
Hamel
Mass
only has
Place,
that one.
Stanton, Spring, Spring Valley, I have a few.
That hasn't started yet.
I have a
Spring
few high contract amount projects that are coming through Hamel, and they are all in the LCP tracker. So as a subcontractor, the best thing to know about that is that if you have a contract, as Deanne stated, in the amount of $300,000 or above, you then will have to enter into a first source agreement. So I then will have to receive that agreement through my desk, and it has to be executed and back to Deanne, which will then submit that back to you guys, or to any, whoever the sub is, prior to the start of work. And you're required to abide by the 20% DC journeyman ratio, 60% apprentice, 51% skilled labor, and 70% of common laborers. Even if you have a contract value that is less than $300,000, let's say your contract is $150,000, and you're saying, well, I don't have to abide by the first source requirements because my contract value is not $300,000 or above. There is something that you do have to abide by, and that is, by Davis-Bacon law, you have to submit weekly certified payroll submissions. And that is very important, because there are some subcontractors that don't know that or just fail to do that, and then it is then becoming a failure, and that can become willful breach of your contract, and then you're subject to a 5% penalty. And depending on how the general contractor is meeting the requirements, you may, as a subcontractor, have a lot of DC residents, and you may fall below the $300,000 threshold where you don't necessarily fall in the first source requirements and have to strictly go to adhere to that those requirements. But as a subcontractor, again, you may have a lot of DC residents, and as a general as your general contractor, you want to still do work with the general contractor and get brought on to more projects, and you're doing good work. Your high percentage of DC residents can now help that general contractor bring the numbers up, where it's a chance that that helping could also be a positive to the project. That's something to also keep in mind. Just the ratios are there. I don't make the ratios. I didn't make the law. Those things were in place before me. I'm only in my 30s. Those things been there for years.
And I already explained that Hamel has made the decision that we are electing to have per subcontractor meet these requirements. We are going to stand with you, but it's going to be per subcontractor.
Meaning, if the subcontractors are not meeting the requirements, and I'm calling Deanne and the compliance team, which what will start happening is, and what I do with my bigger projects is, me and Ms. Samuels will have, and you hear me saying me and Ms. Samuels, so sometimes it's very difficult because we have loads and loads and loads and loads and loads of projects coming throughout our agency and throughout the program. And there's me, Carla Washington, and Alex Underwood that are on these first source projects, construction projects. And then you have Ms. Aletta Samuels and Ramon Gilead that are on the apprentice side. Generally, what I try to do is bi-monthly contractor meetings for compliance meetings for my projects, my bigger projects. So meeting it by sub-level. I've had to do this before. Let's say as a result of our bi-monthly meeting, and we're halfway through the project, we see that, okay, we have X amount of subcontractors that are not meeting the goal.